Welcome to Luxury Empire Stories.
The sound of Chloe Hastings' heels clicking against the polished marble floor of the lobby was the only noise piercing the suffocating silence. She carried a single flimsy cardboard box containing a wilted desk plant, a cracked coffee mug, and a framed photograph. Behind the frosted glass walls of the executive boardroom, her colleagues weren't just watching, they were staring. Some whispered behind cupped hands, some smirked. Her boss, Arthur Pendleton, stood at the head of the table holding a champagne flute, openly toasting to a sudden, humiliating dismissal. She was walking away with absolutely nothing. No severance, no vested stock options, no dignity. But as the heavy elevator doors finally slid shut, shielding her from their predatory gazes, Chloe didn't cry. A slow, chilling smile spread across her face, because Arthur Pendleton had no idea what he had just signed. The 42nd floor of the Sterling Pendleton Logistics Building in downtown Chicago was a monument to corporate excess. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Lake Michigan, but inside, the atmosphere was as cold as the steel beams holding the skyscraper together. For 3 years, Chloe Hastings had been the invisible spine of the company. As the director of global operations, she was the one who salvaged failing supply chains, negotiated brutal shipping rates, and kept the company from buckling under its own weight. Her crowning achievement had been Project Zephyr, a massive multi-year logistics contract with Omni Global, a retail titan. It was a deal worth $800 million, and Chloe had spent the last 10 months bleeding for it. She had worked 80-hour weeks, missed her sister's wedding, and survived on black coffee and adrenaline to iron out every excruciating detail. Today was supposed to be the day the deal was finalized, and consequently, the day Chloe was named Executive Vice President. Instead, at 2 p.m., an impromptu all-hands meeting was called in the central atrium. Chloe stood near the front, exhausted, but vibrating with a quiet pride. Beside her stood Rachel Sims, a junior analyst Chloe had personally mentored, promoted, and protected from the toxic corporate culture. Arthur Pendleton, the CEO, stepped up to the microphone. Arthur was a man who wore custom Brioni suits and had the uncanny ability to take credit for the sunrise. "Team," Arthur began, his voice booming with unearned charisma. "Today we officially closed the Omni Global contract. It is the largest acquisition in this firm's history, and it would not have been possible without the tireless, visionary leadership of our new Executive Vice President." Chloe took a half-step forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Rachel Sims," Arthur announced. The applause that erupted felt like physical blows to Chloe's chest. She froze, the blood draining from her face. She turned her head slowly to look at Rachel. The younger woman didn't look surprised. In fact, Rachel wouldn't even meet Chloe's eyes. She simply smoothed the skirt of her designer dress, stepped forward, and shook Arthur's hand, smiling for the company photographer. It was a theft so brazen, so public, that Chloe momentarily lost her breath. But the humiliation was far from over. Before the applause had even died down, Arthur's assistant, a severe woman named Beatrice, tapped Chloe on the shoulder. "Mr. Pendleton needs to see you in his office. Now." 10 minutes later, Chloe sat across from Arthur's massive mahogany desk. Rachel was already there, sitting rigidly in the corner, clutching a leather binder. "I'll keep this brief, Chloe," Arthur said, leaning back in his leather chair and steepling his fingers. He didn't look like a man who had just stolen a year of someone's life. He looked bored. "You're being terminated. Effective immediately." Chloe stared at him, her analytical mind trying to process the absurdity of the statement. "Terminated? On what grounds? I built the Omni Global deal from the ground up." "Actually, you endangered it," Arthur countered smoothly. He gestured to Rachel, who opened the binder and slid a stack of printed emails across the desk. "Rachel came to me this morning with some highly concerning information. It appears you shared confidential proprietary algorithms with a third-party vendor last month. That's a direct violation of your non-disclosure agreement." Chloe looked down at the emails. They were correspondences she had sent to an independent auditor, an auditor Arthur himself had explicitly told her to consult, though he had conveniently given that instruction verbally. Rachel, who had access to Chloe's inbox to help manage scheduling, had cherry-picked the emails to make them look like corporate espionage. "You authorized that audit, Arthur," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And Rachel, you know exactly what those files are." Rachel finally looked up, her expression hardened with naked ambition. "I just reported what I saw, Chloe. I have to protect the company." Arthur sighed in mock sympathy. "Because this is a termination for cause, Chloe, you forfeit your severance package. Furthermore, the 200,000 shares of company stock you were granted upon your hiring. They vest tomorrow. Since you are fired today, they revert to the corporate pool." The math hit Chloe instantly. Arthur wasn't just taking her job and her credit. He was stealing her equity. Millions of dollars erased with a single signature. He was firing her 24 hours before her payday to pad his own bottom line. "You're a thief, Arthur," Chloe said, standing up. Her voice didn't shake. "You always have been. You couldn't build a legacy, so you cannibalize the people who build it for you." Arthur's smug demeanor vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine malice. "Pack your desk, Chloe. Security will escort you out in 5 minutes. If you try to contact Omni Global, or if you attempt to sue, I will tie you up in litigation until you are bankrupt. You are nothing in this industry without my endorsement. Remember that." Chloe didn't scream. She didn't throw the heavy crystal paperweight sitting on his desk, though the temptation was profound. She simply looked at Arthur, then at Rachel, committing their expressions of triumph to memory. "Goodbye, Arthur," she said softly. She walked out to the bullpen, packed her pitiful cardboard box under the watchful eye of a burly security guard, and endured the long walk to the elevators. She felt the heavy weight of their stares, the mockery, the sheer cruelty of the corporate machine chewing her up and spitting her out. She walked away with nothing. Or so they thought. The rain was beating rhythmically against the windowpane of Chloe's modest 2-bedroom apartment in Logan Square. It was 8 p.m. The cardboard box sat on her kitchen island, untouched, a grim monument to her afternoon. She poured herself a glass of cheap Cabernet, sat on her velvet sofa, and opened her personal laptop. The glow of the screen illuminated her face in the dark room. There were no tears. The shock had burned off during the subway ride home, leaving behind a cold, crystalline focus. Arthur Pendleton thought he had outsmarted her. He thought she was just another brilliant, naive workhorse he could put down when she became too expensive. But Chloe Hastings hadn't survived a decade in the cutthroat logistics industry by being naive. 3 months ago, while auditing the initial financial models for the Omni Global deal, Chloe had found an anomaly. A massive one. Arthur was quietly siphoning millions of dollars from the company's operational budget into offshore accounts disguised as consulting fees. He was bleeding the company dry, using the influx of cash from the upcoming Omni Global deal to cover up his tracks. Chloe knew that going to the board of directors with just a spreadsheet would be corporate suicide. Arthur had stacked the board with his cronies. They would bury the evidence and destroy her career. She needed something ironclad. She needed a trap that Arthur would spring himself. So, she had built one. Chloe opened an encrypted communication app on her laptop and dialed a number she had memorized weeks ago. It rang twice before a gravelly, aristocratic voice answered. "Speak." "It's Chloe Hastings, Mr. Sterling," she said, taking a slow sip of her wine. "Harrison Sterling, the billionaire founder of Sterling Holding Group and the silent majority shareholder of Sterling Pendleton Logistics, was a ghost in the corporate world. He had founded the company 40 years ago and stepped down, leaving it in the hands of young blood like Arthur. But Harrison was notoriously ruthless, and he despised incompetence. "I assume, given the time of your call, that Arthur made his move?" Harrison asked. "He did," Chloe confirmed. He fired me at 2:30 p.m. For cause. He used Rachel Sims to fabricate an NDA breach so he could cancel my stock vesting. A dry, harsh chuckle echoed through the phone. Predictable. The man has the subtlety of a sledgehammer and the omni-global contract. Signed and sealed this morning, Chloe replied, pulling up a digital copy of the master contract she had forwarded to a private server weeks ago. He was so eager to push it through and announce Rachel as the new VP that he didn't have legal do a final line-by-line review of the execution copy. He just skimmed the executive summary. Tell me about the clause, Miss Hastings. Chloe smiled. It was the same chilling smile she had worn in the elevator. Section 42, paragraph C, the key person dependency clause. I drafted it directly with OmniGlobal's legal team, framing it as a standard continuity guarantee for an operation of this magnitude. And the exact wording? Harrison pressed. It states that the integrity and execution of the supply chain algorithms are solely dependent on the continuous oversight of the architect, namely, me. If I am removed, terminated, or reassigned from the position of Director of Global Operations within the first 36 months of the contract, OmniGlobal has the legal right to void the entire $800 million agreement instantaneously, Harrison finished for her, his voice dripping with dark satisfaction. And more importantly, the termination of that contract triggers a catastrophic default clause on the company's debt to my holding group. Exactly, Chloe said. Arthur didn't just fire an employee today. He legally invalidated the biggest contract in the company's history and put the entire firm into technical default. By tomorrow morning, OmniGlobal's automated systems will flag my removal from the active employee directory. They will issue a breach of contract notice before Arthur even finishes his morning espresso. There was a long silence on the line. The sound of the rain outside seemed to amplify. You are a very dangerous woman, Chloe, Harrison said finally. There was deep respect in his tone. Arthur thought he was playing chess, but he didn't realize you owned the board. What time is the emergency board meeting tomorrow? I imagine Arthur will panic and call it for 10 a.m. once the OmniGlobal breach notice hits his desk, Chloe said, checking her watch. He'll try to blame it on a clerical error, or he'll try to find a way to pin the default on me. Let him try, Harrison said, his voice hardening into steel. I haven't attended a board meeting in person in 5 years. I think it's time I paid Chicago a visit. Wear something sharp tomorrow, Chloe. We have a company to take over. The line went dead. Chloe closed the laptop. She walked over to the cardboard box on the kitchen island. She took out the cracked coffee mug, walked to the trash can, and dropped it in. It shattered against the bottom. Tomorrow, she wouldn't be walking into Sterling Pendleton Logistics through the employee entrance. She would be walking through the front doors, and Arthur Pendleton was going to learn exactly what happens when you steal from the wrong woman. At 8 a.m. the following morning, Arthur Pendleton felt like a king surveying his conquered lands. He stepped out of his private elevator on the 42nd floor, a bespoke Italian wool coat draped over his arm, humming a vague jazz tune. The corporate machinery of Sterling Pendleton Logistics was humming around him, oblivious to the blood spilled the previous afternoon. He paused at the glass-walled office that used to belong to Chloe. The nameplate had already been swapped. It now read, Rachel Sims, Executive Vice President. Inside, Rachel was staring blankly at a sprawling array of monitors displaying the proprietary Zephyr interface, the custom routing and predictive weather algorithm Chloe had spent 2 years writing. Red warning lights were blinking on the dashboard, indicating unassigned freight loads sitting in ports from Shanghai to Rotterdam. Rachel clicked her mouse frantically, her brow beaded with nervous sweat. She had a master's degree in business administration, but looking at Chloe's raw code was like trying to decipher ancient Sumerian. Arthur tapped on the glass, offering her a magnanimous, patronizing smile. He didn't care if Rachel understood the system. He only cared that she was compliant and cheap. He walked into his own cavernous office, ordered his assistant Beatrice to hold his calls, and prepared to draft his triumphant quarterly update for the shareholders. At 8:42 a.m., his computer chimed. It wasn't a standard email notification. It was a high-priority, system-wide override alert that flashed crimson across his dual monitors. Critical alert. Omni Global Master Agreement, 884A. Status: terminated. Cause: key person dependency failure. Clause 42C. Arthur blinked, his brain refusing to process the words on the screen. He clicked the notification, opening an automated legal dispatch from Omni Global's headquarters. It was a formal notice of breach. This communication serves as immediate legal notice that due to the unauthorized removal of Chloe Hastings from the role of Director of Global Operations, Sterling Pendleton Logistics is in material breach of Contract 884A. Under the stipulations of Section 42, Paragraph C, Omni Global hereby exercises its right to terminate the agreement, effective instantaneously. All pending capital transfers are frozen. Cease and desist all logistical operations on our behalf. Beatrice! Arthur bellowed, his voice cracking. He lunged for his desk phone, knocking over a silver pen holder. Get David Hirsch on the line, right now! David Hirsch, the company's weary chief legal counsel, answered the phone within seconds. He sounded out of breath. Arthur, I just saw the system alert. What the hell did you do? What did I do? Arthur screamed, spittle flying onto his monitor. What did you do, David? How did a poison pill like this get past your legal team? Because you bypassed us, Arthur, David yelled back, his usual timid demeanor evaporating under the sheer magnitude of the disaster. You took the execution copy directly from Chloe yesterday morning and signed it without a secondary review. You said you wanted the ink dry before the all-hands meeting. I never saw the final draft. It's a mistake. It has to be, Arthur stammered, his pulse hammering against his temples. Call Omni Global's legal department. Tell them it was a clerical error. Tell them Chloe was temporarily reassigned. Arthur, the system doesn't lie. Their automated compliance crawlers scan our active employee database every 12 hours. Chloe's ID badge was deactivated at 2:45 p.m. yesterday. They know she's gone. David paused, the silence on the line hanging heavy. Arthur, it gets worse. Arthur's stomach bottomed out. How could it possibly get worse than losing an $800 million contract? The Sterling Holding Group debt covenant, David whispered, stating the words like a death sentence. Our operating lines of credit with Harrison Sterling's group are secured against our projected revenue. Losing the Omni Global contract drops our projected quarterly revenue by 40%. That triggers an automatic default on the Sterling loans. We owe them $300 million, due immediately. Arthur, we are insolvent. The phone slipped from Arthur's sweaty grip, clattering onto the mahogany desk. He stared out the floor-to-ceiling window at the grey expanse of Lake Michigan. He wasn't looking at a view anymore. He was looking at a sheer drop. Panic, raw and suffocating, clawed at his throat. He needed a scapegoat. He needed time. He snatched the phone back up. Call an emergency meeting of the board of directors, 10:30 a.m. Do not tell them about the default. Tell them it's a strategic realignment meeting regarding a rogue employee. I'm going to fix this. He hung up and stormed out of his office, bursting into Rachel's workspace. She jumped, nearly spilling a cup of coffee over the keyboard. Get Chloe Hastings on the phone, Arthur barked, his face flushed purple. Offer her double her original salary. Tell her the termination was a misunderstanding. Promise her a corner office, a seat on the executive committee, whatever it takes. Get her back in this building. Rachel's hands shook as she picked up her cell phone. She dialed Chloe's number. It rang once and went straight to a generic, automated voicemail. She blocked my number, Arthur, Rachel stammered, looking up with terrified eyes. And the Zephyr system, it's locked. It's asking for a secondary biometric authentication that only Chloe has. I can't even route our existing clients. Arthur stared at her, the realization dawning on him like a slow-moving executioner. Chloe hadn't just walked away. She had deliberately removed the linchpin holding the entire company together, and she had done it from the inside out. "You useless idiot," Arthur hissed at Rachel, turning on his heel. He had exactly 1 hour to craft the lie of his life before the board members arrived. The executive boardroom on the 43rd floor was a masterpiece of intimidation. A 30-foot slab of polished black granite served as the table, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. At 10:30 a.m. sharp, 6 members of the board of directors were seated. They were a mix of wealthy investors and industry veterans, none of whom looked pleased to be summoned on a Tuesday morning. Simon Croft, an aging venture capitalist who represented the second-largest voting bloc, tapped his gold fountain pen impatiently against his notepad. "Let's get on with this, Arthur. What is this strategic realignment nonsense? My assistant said something about a terminated contract?" Arthur stood at the head of the table, projecting an aura of calm authority that he absolutely did not feel. He had spent the last hour rehearsing this spin. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Arthur began, smoothing the lapels of his suit. "Yesterday, I made the difficult executive decision to terminate Chloe Hastings, our Director of Global Operations. We uncovered evidence that she was carelessly sharing proprietary data outside the firm." Murmurs rippled through the room. Penelope Hayes, a sharp-eyed woman who oversaw the company's risk management portfolio, frowned deeply. "Chloe Hastings, the architect of the Omni Global deal? Arthur, are you insane? That deal closes this week." "It closed yesterday, Penelope," Arthur said smoothly. "However, it appears Miss Hastings, anticipating her termination, acted with extreme malice. She fraudulently inserted a key person dependency clause into the final contract without legal's knowledge. This morning, she weaponized that clause to temporarily suspend the Omni Global agreement." Simon Croft stopped tapping his pen. "Temporarily suspend? What does that mean?" "It is a minor hurdle," Arthur lied seamlessly. "I have already dispatched our litigation team. We will be suing Miss Hastings for corporate sabotage and breach of fiduciary duty. We expect a court injunction forcing Omni Global to honor the contract by the end of the week. In the interim, Rachel Sims has stepped into the EVP role and has the situation entirely under control." "That is a fascinating fairy tale, Arthur," a voice echoed from the back of the room. "But your grasp on reality seems to be slipping." Every head in the boardroom whipped towards the entrance. The heavy, soundproof oak doors had swung open silently. Standing in the threshold was Chloe Hastings. She wore a tailored, midnight blue power suit that radiated authority. Her posture was flawless, her expression completely unreadable. But it wasn't Chloe who caused the collective gasp in the room. It was the man standing beside her. Harrison Sterling leaned heavily on a silver-headed cane, but age had not diminished the terrifying presence of the billionaire founder. He wore a simple charcoal 3-piece suit, his silver hair swept back, his pale blue eyes pinning Arthur to the wall like a butterfly on a corkboard. "Mr. Sterling," Simon Croft choked out, half standing from his chair. The rest of the board members stared in stunned silence. Harrison hadn't set foot in this building in 5 years. "Sit down, Simon," Harrison commanded, his voice barely above a rasp, yet it commanded total obedience. He walked slowly into the room, his cane thudding rhythmically against the hardwood floor. Chloe walked in tandem, carrying a stack of thick, black leather dossiers. Arthur's face drained of all color. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, and in a corporate sense he had. "Harrison, we weren't expecting you. I can explain the situation with Miss Hastings." "You will not speak," Harrison interrupted, stopping at the opposite end of the granite table. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You will stand there, Arthur, and you will listen to how thoroughly you have destroyed your own career." Harrison gestured to Chloe. Without a word, she began walking around the table, placing a black dossier in front of each board member. She did not look at Arthur. "Arthur just told you that Miss Hastings sabotaged the OmniGlobal contract," Harrison addressed the board, leaning forward on his cane. "That is a lie. The clause was negotiated openly with OmniGlobal. Arthur simply didn't bother to read the final contract before signing it, because he was too eager to fire the woman who built it and steal her unvested equity." "Nah." Penelope Hayes opened the dossier. "These are emails between Arthur and Rachel Sims. Miss Sims aided Arthur in fabricating a termination for cause," Harrison continued smoothly. "But that is merely the appetizer of Arthur's incompetence. Turn to page 4. The rustle of paper filled the silent room. "Yesterday evening," Harrison said, "Miss Hastings brought a discrepancy to my attention. Arthur, would you care to explain the Apex Consulting Group to the board?" Arthur gripped the edge of the granite table to keep his knees from buckling. A cold sweat drenched his custom shirt. It's a third-party logistics vendor. We use them for overflow capacity in the Pacific Rim. Apex Consulting is a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. Chloe spoke for the first time. Her voice was clear, ringing with undeniable certainty. It has no assets, no employees, and no maritime operational licenses. Over the past 14 months, Arthur Pendleton has authorized 112 wire transfers to Apex, totaling $14.6 million. The boardroom erupted. Simon Croft slammed his hand on the table. $14 million? Arthur, what the hell is this? "I can prove every dollar," Chloe said, tapping the dossier in front of Simon. "Page 6 contains the routing numbers, the authorization signatures, all bearing Arthur's digital footprint, and the corresponding offshore accounts linked directly to a trust in Arthur's name." Arthur looked frantically around the room. The faces that had looked at him with respect just 20 minutes ago were now masks of absolute disgust and fury. He was cornered, trapped by the very woman he had discarded like trash. "She manipulated the data," Arthur shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Chloe. "She's a disgruntled employee. She hacked the mainframe to frame me." Harrison Sterling laughed, a dry, humorless sound that echoed off the glass walls. "Arthur, you couldn't tell a server rack from a toaster oven. Miss Hastings didn't hack anything. She did her job. She audited the books you were too arrogant to hide properly." Harrison turned to the board, his eyes sweeping over them. "Because of Arthur's gross negligence in firing Miss Hastings, OmniGlobal has terminated their contract. As of 8:42 a.m. this morning, this company is in technical default on its $300 million debt covenant to my holding group." A heavy, deathly silence fell over the room. The board members realized simultaneously that the company wasn't just in trouble. It was effectively owned by Harrison Sterling again. "However," Harrison said, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr, "I am willing to restructure the debt and reinstate the operating lines of credit. OmniGlobal is also willing to reinstate Contract 884A, but both of these lifelines come with a singular, non-negotiable condition." Harrison stepped back, yielding the floor entirely to the woman in the midnight blue suit. Chloe looked directly at Arthur Pendleton. The chill in her eyes was absolute. She wasn't just taking her job back. She was taking his empire. "The condition," Chloe said, "is my appointment as Chief Executive Officer." The silence that followed Chloe's demand was absolute. It was the kind of silence that existed at the bottom of the ocean, crushing, dark, and devoid of oxygen. Arthur Pendleton stared at the woman he had dismissed as a glorified human calculator just 20 hours prior. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish pulled onto the deck of a boat. He looked toward Simon Croft, seeking an ally, a lifeline, anything. But the veteran venture capitalist was already sliding the black dossier back across the polished granite table, adjusting his reading glasses with a look of profound disgust. "Chief Executive Officer," Simon repeated, testing the weight of the title. He looked at Harrison Sterling. "Harrison, you cannot be serious. Miss Hastings is brilliant, undoubtedly, but she is 32 years old. To hand her the reins of a $4 billion logistics empire overnight, Simon, you are currently debating the age of the firefighter, while the house burns to the ground, Harrison replied, his raspy voice slicing through the objection. He leaned heavily on his silver-headed cane. As of this precise minute, Sterling Pendleton Logistics is insolvent. Arthur has embezzled $14.6 million, triggering a default that will allow my holding group to liquidate your shares for pennies on the dollar by Friday. If you prefer bankruptcy to a 32-year-old CEO, we can end this meeting right now. Penelope Hayes, the head of risk management, didn't hesitate. She slammed her palm onto the table. I second the motion to appoint Chloe Hastings as acting chief executive officer, effective immediately. We need the Omni Global contract reinstated before the markets open tomorrow, or our stock will crater into the earth. Wait! Arthur finally found his voice. It was shrill, completely stripped of its usual baritone polish. He lunged forward, pressing his hands flat against the granite. You can't do this. I built the modern infrastructure of this company. You're going to take the word of a disgruntled middle manager over your own CEO. I can fix the debt covenant. I have private equity contacts in New York. Arthur, David Hirsch, the chief legal counsel, spoke up from the corner of the room. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on the financial routing numbers in the dossier. These offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, they are tied directly to your social security number and a private holding company registered in Delaware. This isn't just corporate mismanagement. This is federal wire fraud. It's a violation of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. You're looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Arthur physically recoiled as if he had been struck. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent grey. David, you're my lawyer. You have to defend me. I'm the company's lawyer, Arthur. David corrected him coldly. And right now, you are the greatest legal liability this company has ever faced. Chloe stood perfectly still, watching the man who had tormented her for 3 years disintegrate in real time. She felt no pity. Arthur had built his career on the broken backs of talented people, stealing their credit, burying their achievements, and discarding them when they asked for their fair share. He was a parasite, and it was time for the host to purge him. Motion on the table. Richard Abernathy, a traditionally quiet board member who represented a massive institutional pension fund, interjected to immediately terminate Arthur Pendleton as chief executive officer for gross misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, and suspected criminal embezzlement. Furthermore, to strip him of all unvested equity, severance, and golden parachute provisions under the moral turpitude clause of his employment contract. All in favor? Simon Croft asked, his voice ringing like a gavel. Aye, Penelope said instantly. Aye, Richard echoed. One by one, every single member of the board voiced their agreement. The vote was unanimous. Now, Simon continued, turning his gaze to Chloe. He studied her, searching for a crack in her armor, a sign of weakness. He found none. Motion to appoint Chloe Hastings as Chief Executive Officer, with full executive authority to restructure the firm's debt and renegotiate Contract 884A. Again, the chorus of ayes filled the room. Arthur collapsed into a leather chair, burying his face in his hands. His custom Brioni suite suddenly looked 2 sizes too big for him. The empire he thought he controlled had been stripped from him in less than 15 minutes. Harrison Sterling turned to Chloe, a rare, genuine smile touching the corners of his mouth. Congratulations, Madam CEO. I believe you have some house cleaning to do. Chloe nodded. She reached into her suit pocket, pulled out her cell phone, and pressed a single button on her speed dial. The call connected to the security desk in the lobby. This is Chloe Hastings, she said, her voice echoing perfectly in the silent boardroom. I need Marcus Thorne from security to come up to the 43rd floor executive boardroom immediately. Bring an empty cardboard box. Arthur snapped his head up. his eyes wide with a frantic, animalistic terror. "Chloe, please, let me resign quietly. Let me retain my vested shares. I'll sign a non-compete. I'll disappear. You don't have to do this." Chloe walked slowly around the granite table until she was standing directly over him. The scent of his expensive cologne, usually suffocating, now smelled like fear. "Yesterday, Arthur, you stood in front of the entire company and toasted to my humiliation," Chloe said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You stole my life's work. You tried to steal my financial future. You told me I would be nothing in this industry without your endorsement." She leaned in closer, her eyes locked onto his. "Look around, Arthur. Do I look like I need your endorsement?" The heavy oak doors opened. A burly security guard stepped into the room. It was the exact same guard who had escorted Chloe to the elevators yesterday afternoon. He held a flattened cardboard box in his massive hands, looking incredibly confused to see Chloe standing next to the billionaire founder and the board of directors. "Marcus," Chloe addressed the guard, never taking her eyes off Arthur. "Mr. Pendleton has been terminated. Escort him to his office. Allow him to pack his personal effects. Nothing with a company logo, no electronic devices, no hard drives. Then march him out through the central atrium and out the front doors. If he resists, call the police." Arthur trembled, his fists clenched, but the fight had completely left him. He was a hollowed-out shell. He stood up slowly, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. Without a word, he turned and walked towards the door, followed closely by the imposing security guard. As the doors closed behind him, the board members let out a collective breath they seemed to have been holding. "David," Chloe said, instantly pivoting to the chief legal counsel. The cold vengeance was gone, replaced by terrifying efficiency. "Contact the FBI field office in Chicago. Hand over the entire dossier on the Apex Consulting accounts. We are self-reporting the embezzlement to cooperate fully with federal authorities. It will shield the company's stock price from collateral damage when the news breaks." David nodded frantically, already typing on his phone. "Right away, Miss Hastings." "Simon, Penelope," Chloe continued, commanding the room with effortless authority. "Draft the press release for the Wire. Frame it as a strategic leadership transition initiated by Harrison Sterling to prioritize the Omni Global Partnership. Keep Arthur's legal troubles out of the press until the feds make an arrest. We control the narrative." Harrison Sterling leaned heavily on his cane, watching her orchestrate the chaos with the precision of a maestro conducting a symphony. He hadn't felt this invigorated in a decade. He had bet on the right horse. "What is your first order of business on the 42nd floor, Chloe?" Harrison asked. Chloe smoothed the lapels of her midnight blue jacket. "I have to fire an executive vice president." The atmosphere on the 42nd floor was completely different from the triumphant, smug environment Chloe had left behind 24 hours ago. The news of the system lockdown and the Omni Global breach notice had leaked through the grapevine. The bullpen was utterly silent. Analysts, logistics coordinators, and junior executives sat frozen at their desks, staring at their disabled monitors. When the elevator chimed and the polished steel doors slid open, every head in the room turned. They expected Arthur Pendleton to march out, shouting orders and demanding impossible miracles. Instead, Chloe Hastings stepped onto the floor. She didn't carry a cardboard box. She didn't look down. She walked with the measured, predatory grace of a lioness returning to her pride. Behind her, trailing a respectful 3 paces back, was David Hirsch, clutching a thick stack of legal documents. A collective gasp rippled through the bullpen. The whispering started instantly, a frantic hiss of confusion and shock. Chloe ignored them. She walked straight past her old glass-walled office, the one currently bearing Rachel Sims' nameplate, and headed directly toward the cavernous, mahogany-paneled suite at the end of the hall, the CEO's office. Inside her former office, Rachel Sims was in a state of sheer, unadulterated panic. Her designer dress was wrinkled, her makeup was smudged, and she was violently jabbing her finger at the keyboard, trying to bypass the biometric lock on the Zephyr interface. The red critical failure lights from the Omni Global system were flashing across her face, casting her in a demonic glow. Chloe didn't bother knocking. She opened the glass door and stepped inside. Rachel whipped around, her eyes wide with terror. When she saw Chloe standing there, flanking the chief legal counsel, all the color drained from her face. "Chloe!" Rachel gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. "I'm so glad you're here." "Arthur's gone crazy. The system locked me out. I tried to call you, I swear. He made me do it yesterday. He threatened to fire me if I didn't give him those emails. You have to believe me." It was a pathetic, desperate lie, and they both knew it. Chloe looked around the office she had lived in for 3 years. She saw her meticulously organized filing cabinets ransacked, her personal whiteboard erased and covered in Rachel's frantic, nonsensical scribbles. "Stop talking, Rachel," Chloe said. Her voice wasn't raised, but it cut through the room like a scalpel. Rachel's mouth snapped shut. She began to tremble. "Arthur didn't make you do anything," Chloe stated factually, stepping closer to the desk. "You saw an opportunity to leapfrog over 10 years of hard work, and you took it. You accessed my private inbox, selectively curated correspondences out of context, and handed them to a man you knew was looking for an excuse to steal my equity. You aren't a victim, Rachel. You are an accomplice." Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes, finally spilling over her mascara. "Please, Chloe, if you take this to HR, it will ruin my career. I'll be blacklisted in the industry. I have student loans. I'll do anything. I'll step down. I'll go back to being a junior analyst." Chloe looked at the younger woman, remembering the countless hours she had spent mentoring her, defending her mistakes to upper management, and teaching her the intricacies of global supply chains. The betrayal still stung, a sharp, cold ache in her chest, but she couldn't afford to lead with emotion. A CEO had to lead with absolute pragmatism. "You aren't going back to being a junior analyst, Rachel," Chloe said softly. "You are going to sit at this desk, and you are going to write a legally binding, sworn affidavit." David Hirsch stepped forward, placing a pen and a blank legal pad on the desk. "You are going to detail, chronologically, exactly how Arthur Pendleton instructed you to fabricate the NDA breach," Chloe instructed. "You will confess to accessing my communications without authorization. You will outline the timeline of his actions." "If I write that," Rachel sobbed, staring at the blank paper as if it were a loaded gun, "I'll never get a job in logistics again. It's a confession to corporate espionage." "If you don't write it," David Hirsch interjected, his voice surprisingly firm, "the board will file a civil suit against you for millions of dollars in damages for your role in triggering the Omni Global default. And when the FBI finishes investigating Arthur for the $14 million he embezzled, they will look very closely at the executive vice president who helped him cover his tracks." Rachel gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Embezzlement? I didn't know anything about that. I swear." "Then prove it," Chloe commanded, tapping the legal pad. "Write the affidavit. Give the company the ammunition it needs to legally destroy Arthur, and I will allow you to resign quietly, effective today. I will not file a civil suit. But if you ever apply for a job within a 500-mile radius of Chicago, I will personally mail this affidavit to your prospective employer. Do you understand?" Rachel didn't hesitate. She collapsed into the chair, grabbed the pen, and began writing frantically, her tears staining the yellow paper. Chloe didn't wait for her to finish. She turned and walked out of the office, leaving David to collect the confession. She walked down the hallway and pushed open the heavy mahogany doors to the CEO's suite. Arthur's personal effects were already gone, packed away by security. The massive desk was empty. The panoramic view of the city stretched out before her, vast and commanding. She walked behind the desk, booted up the primary terminal, and placed her thumb on the biometric scanner. "Identity verified," Chloe Hastings, access level, administrator. The screens flickered. The red warning lights blinking across the global map instantly vanished, replaced by a soothing, operational green. The Zephyr interface roared back to life, instantly rerouting thousands of freight ships, cargo planes, and semi-trucks across the globe. She picked up the receiver of the heavy, multi-line phone and dialed the direct number for Thomas Wright, the Chief Operations Officer at Omni Global. He answered on the first ring. "Mr. Pendleton, if you are calling to beg, our legal department has explicitly told me not to speak with you." "This isn't Arthur, Thomas," Chloe said, sitting down in the high-backed leather chair. It felt infinitely more comfortable than she had imagined. "It's Chloe Hastings." There was a stunned pause on the line. Then a hearty laugh echoed through the speaker. "Chloe, thank God. When the automated system flagged your removal, I nearly had a heart attack. What the hell is going on over there?" "Arthur Pendleton has been removed as CEO by the board of directors," Chloe explained smoothly, her eyes scanning the data streams cascading across her monitors. "He suffered a sudden crisis of conscience. I have been appointed as his successor." "CEO?" Thomas sounded incredibly impressed. "Well, that is the best news I've heard all week. I assume the key person dependency breach is resolved?" "The architect is back in the building," Chloe confirmed. "You can authorize the release of the capital transfers. Contract 884A is live." "Excellent. We'll wire the initial 80 million by noon." Thomas paused. "You played a dangerous game, Chloe. If that clause hadn't held up, Arthur would have ruined you." "Arthur thought he was playing a game of checkers, Thomas," Chloe said, looking out at the Chicago skyline, the grey clouds finally beginning to break, revealing patches of brilliant blue sky. "He forgot that I built the board." She hung up the phone. She sat in the silence of the massive office, the hum of the servers beneath the floor vibrating through her shoes. Yesterday she had walked out of this building with a wilted plant and a broken mug, stripped of everything she had earned. Today, she owned the sky. She pressed the intercom button on her desk, connecting to the severe assistant, Beatrice, who was sitting nervously in the outer office. "Beatrice," Chloe said, her voice echoing with the absolute authority of a woman who had walked through the fire and forged herself into steel. "Please inform the executive committee that a mandatory strategy meeting will commence in 20 minutes. "And Beatrice?" "Yes, Miss Hastings?" the assistant squeaked. "I need a new desk plant, something resilient." The fallout from Arthur Pendleton's termination was a meticulously controlled demolition. By Wednesday morning, the public relations firm released a bland statement announcing Arthur's immediate retirement. But behind the closed doors of the 42nd floor, it was a bloodbath. Within 48 hours, the FBI raided Arthur's $10 million Lake Forest estate. Forensic accountants froze every domestic and offshore asset tied to the Cayman Islands shell company. Arthur was placed under house arrest, stripped of his bespoke Brioni suits and his dignity, awaiting federal indictments. Back at the skyscraper, Chloe wasn't celebrating. She was performing triage. She fired complicit executives, promoted the exhausted floor managers who actually ran the company, and instituted a policy of radical transparency. But her true test arrived 72 hours into the Omni Global contract. The Zephyr interface flashed a severe amber warning. A freak, Category 4 storm, Hurricane Silas, had shifted course, barreling directly towards the port of Savannah. Omni Global had $200 million of consumer electronics on 4 massive freighters right in the storm's path. If they didn't unload within 48 hours, the holiday distribution window would slam shut. Thomas Wright called, frantic. "The Coast Guard is closing Savannah. We have to anchor the ships at sea. If you do that, you lose 40% of your quarterly revenue," Chloe replied, her eyes locked on the digital storm. "We don't outrun it. We outsmart it. Give me 15 minutes. She marched down to the 39th floor operations hub. "Reroute all 4 freighters to Halifax, Nova Scotia," she commanded the stunned analysts. "Halifax will be 1,000 miles from the target distribution centers," a senior dispatcher protested. "The trucking delays will kill us. By truck, yes, but not by rail," Chloe said, pulling up a web of green lines on the main screen. "I built a predictive module to monitor empty Canadian freight trains. Right now, there are 3 miles of empty rail cars sitting outside Halifax. We dock the ships, load the containers directly onto the trains, and run them straight down the eastern seaboard behind the storm." The sheer audacity of the multimodal synchronization was breathtaking. For 36 hours, Chloe didn't sleep, personally overseeing the intricate ballet. The ships beat the storm by 6 hours. The cargo seamlessly transferred to rail, bypassing flooded highways to deliver the inventory safely to Georgia and Florida. It was a logistical masterpiece that saved Omni Global $85 million and cemented the partnership for a decade. The company's stock surged to an all-time high. 3 months later, Chloe sat in a sterile conference room at the Kirkland & Ellis law firm to tie up the final loose end. Across the mahogany table sat Arthur Pendleton. He looked hollowed out, aged 10 years in 90 days, wearing a cheap, off-the-rack suit. His defense attorney, Robert Loxley, aggressively slid a document forward. "My client asserts that because the Zephyr algorithm was developed under his tenure, he is entitled to licensing royalties," Loxley stated. "We will drop all civil claims for a one-time payout of $2 million. It was a desperate extortion attempt to pay Arthur's mounting legal fees. Chloe didn't look at the lawyer. $2 million to walk away from a system you don't even know how to turn on, Arthur?" she asked coldly. She slid a thick envelope across the table. "I don't need to fight you over intellectual property, because I found the rest of it." Arthur tore open the envelope, his bloodshot eyes widening in terror at the high-resolution satellite photos and banking flowcharts inside. "The Cayman accounts were just a diversion," Chloe explained smoothly. "I spent my weekends digging through the company's real estate metadata. You used an anonymous LLC to funnel $8 million from a Nevada warehouse, purchased directly into an irrevocable family trust in Aspen, Colorado." Arthur stopped breathing. "You didn't steal $14 million, Arthur. You stole $22 million, and you hid the last 8 to shield it from the feds." The federal prosecutor sitting beside Chloe smiled predatorily and placed a pair of handcuffs gently on the table. "That's a violation of your bail conditions. It carries a mandatory minimum of an additional 10 years. Arthur looked at Chloe, utterly defeated. "Why keep digging?" he whispered, a single tear slipping down his hollow cheek. "You already took my company." "You didn't just try to fire me," Chloe said, standing up, her tailored crimson suit immaculate. "You tried to steal my future. I needed you to understand that you were never the architect of this company's success. You were just a squatter in the house I built." She turned to the door. "Withdraw the civil claim, or I hand the Aspen file to the prosecution." She walked out into the sunlit Chicago streets. Her phone buzzed with a text from Harrison Sterling about a massive new European acquisition. Chloe smiled, gazing up at her towering glass skyscraper, and typed back, "I already have the models drafted." The corporate world is a brutal ecosystem, often rewarding the loudest voice rather than the sharpest mind. But Chloe Hastings rewrote the rules of survival. She didn't just break the glass ceiling, she systematically dismantled the corrupt foundation beneath it. Arthur Pendleton became a cautionary ghost story whispered in boardrooms, a vain king who tried to execute his architect, only to have the castle collapse on his head. Sterling Pendleton Logistics entered a golden age, driven by innovation, transparency, and a leader who truly understood the complex machinery she commanded. Chloe walked away from that 42nd floor with nothing but a cardboard box, but she returned with an empire. She proved that true power isn't inherited or stolen. It is brilliantly coded, flawlessly executed, and utterly undeniable. The company didn't just bow to her, it finally learned how to stand.